The text proposed would read as follows. Land is a natural resource fundamental to the economic, social, and political development of peoples. Therefore, governments must maintain full jurisdiction and exercise complete sovereignty over such land with a view to freely planning development of human resources throughout the whole of the national territory. This resource must not be the subject of restrictions imposed by foreign nations which enjoy the benefits while preventing its rational use. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, we would earnestly call on the members of this conference to give their full support to this paragraph which relates to the natural resource land. Thank you.
Thank the distinguished representative of Panama and call on the distinguished representative of Venezuela.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, we believe that we have a historic duty, a duty that we have in Latin America and in the United Nations, to combat colonialism and neo-colonialist methods which are still being used in our part of the world. We earnestly support Panama's amendment. We believe that it is intended to put an end to a colonial enclave, which is a very serious wound, not just in Panama, but in all of Latin America. This is a disruptive force in good relations throughout our hemisphere and should not be allowed to lead to a conflict among all our states. The President of my country, time and time again, has said that Panama's problem is a problem of all of Latin America. And I would like to add that it is not a problem just of Latin America, but it is a problem before the entire world. This is a colonial, this is a form of colonialism which has been imposed by force. The conference, the important conference relating to Panama, was held 150 years ago, and we hope that now in this year this problem will be disposed of once and for all. It will bring peace of mind not only to the people of Panama but to the people of all of Latin America. We would call on all distinguished delegates to give their warmest support to this amendment, and if possible we would like this amendment to be adopted by consensus. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Venezuela and call on the distinguished representative of the United States.
Mr. President, the United States delegation moves that the conference adopt this amendment by consensus. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. And call on the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the Arab delegations to the conference, I would like to declare our support for this amendment. I do not want to go into the details of this question or to justify our approval. However, this amendment is an excellent amendment and we approve it. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates and call on the distinguished representative of Somalia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, this conference is a political conference. There is no doubt in our mind about that. We just like to reiterate this because we have been hearing since last night the contention of certain delegations who would have liked to divert us from the political nature of this conference. This conference deals with extremely important political, economic, and social issues and aspects of our human environment and settlements.
I'm sorry, I must interrupt the distinguished representative of Somalia. There's a point of order by the distinguished representative of Zambia.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I need your guidance. I would have thought that the resolution has been adopted unanimously by acclamation.
The motion has not been put yet. This is speaking to the amendment as proposed by Panama, by those who wish to speak to it. I hope that we can, those who wish to make interventions can do so quickly, so as we have a great substantial amount of business to cover today. The distinguished representative from Somalia.
Yes, sir. Mr. President, we shall be brief and we shall talk to the substance of the Panamanian Amendment. We should like to point out at this stage, Mr. President, that the plight of the uprooted people, such as the Palestinian people and the people of Southern Africa, and the racist and oppressive regimes need our consideration as contained in the Panamanian Amendment by considering land as a natural resource of fundamental economic, social, and political importance for the maintenance of full jurisdiction and the exercise of complete sovereignty over it through free planning and development of settlements. In Eastern Africa, Mr. President, we also have a people similarly deprived of such rights and jurisdiction over their land, which we believe should be brought to the attention of the international community. I'm referring to the people of the Somali coast, a country neighboring ours.
I'm sorry, I must interrupt the honourable or the distinguished representative of Somalia. A point of order from the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. A point of order. There's a proposal by the United States which we would join in, that this be adopted by consensus.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. I would appeal to distinguished representatives to keep their interventions on the amendment itself as brief as possible. I would hope that as soon as the distinguished representative of Somalia has completed his remarks, that we could proceed to the consensus as suggested earlier by both Tunisia and the United States, and other interventions, if necessary, can be made in explanation of vote. If that is your wish, I would call upon the distinguished representative of Somalia to complete his remarks.
Point of order, please, Mr. President. Point of order.
A point of order from the distinguished representative of the United States.
Mr. President, you said a few minutes ago there was no motion to move ahead with a vote of consensus. I just wanted to be sure you understood there was a motion toward that end.
I would like to assure the distinguished representative of the United States that I said that there has been a suggestion of that from the United States and Tunisia, and I think we should proceed with the consensus as soon agreement as soon as we have heard from the distinguished representative of Somalia. Distinguished representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was referring to the people of the Somali coast who are still languishing under the oppressive colonial rule of France. Those people who are at present seriously fighting for their independence and freedom and are facing the most inhumane human settlement policies and have been deprived of the fundamental rights of jurisdiction over and exercise complete sovereignty over their lands and territorial planning. For example, Mr. President, Djibouti, the capital city of the Somali coast, is at present being surrounded by barbed wires. I repeat, barbed wires. Electrified barbed wires. It may be very difficult for many distinguished delegates here to believe that while we are having this conference on human settlements, a large settlement in our continent is having electrified barbed wires around it. Indeed, the whole country in a state that reminds us of concentration camp. Also, thousands of people of the Somali coast are at present living as refugees in Somalia due to the colonial policies of the administration, French colonial administration, who forcibly uprooted them from their homes and land without any reason at all, except their ardent fight for independence and opposition to colonial policies. Under such circumstances, Mr. President, it's not possible at all for those people to maintain jurisdiction and exercise sovereignty over their lands and freely plan their own future. Therefore, we would like to associate ourselves very strongly with the Panamanian Amendment, and it's our hope that it will be accepted unanimously by the conference. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Somalia. May I take it now that the conference adopts the Panamanian proposal unanimously by consent, as suggested by the Tunisian and United States delegations earlier. See the representative, distinguished representative of Belgium. Is it on a point of order?
No. To give also a position, Mr. President, if you allow me to, very shortly.
May I suggest that that be done after the proposal is adopted? Okay. Is it the wish of the conference to adopt this by consensus? It is so decided. I thank distinguished delegates, and for those who have encouraged the consensus approach, we now have some 4 more delegations who wish to express views. I hope that we can move on. The distinguished representative of Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Egypt is associating itself with this draft resolution, but since it has been adopted by consensus, there is no need for our comment.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba and ask recognize the distinguished representative of Cuba. Yes.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, there's hardly any need for us to remind you that the resolution on the Panama Canal at the Regional Conference of Latin America was adopted by consensus by all countries. But in view of the circumstances, there's really no need for me to go into that any further. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba and call on the distinguished representative of Mexico. I then call on the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. While approving the substance of this resolution adopted by consensus, I would like to make a very slight reservation. The Belgian government has, as a general political line, not to accept without reserve the affirmation of absolute sovereignty in such matters if it has not come out of a treaty or obligations which are incumbent about on all people because they belong to this international community. Nonetheless, this does not mean that this must be explicitly mentioned in all the texts which we adopt, but we simply want to point out what the permanent position of my government is on this matter. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Belgium. Finally, now that's done. I put before the conference recommendation D1 as amended. I take it that the conference adopts recommendation D1 as amended without a vote. Yes. Then it is so decided. This concludes our considerations of agenda item 10D, and I should like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Bureau and members of Committee 3 for work very well done. We now turn to the report of the Credentials Committee. I invite the chairman, His Excellency Mr. Leon Rons of Belgium, to introduce the report and document A-Conf 70/12.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. At its second plenary meeting on 31 May last, the conference created, in conformity with Article 4 of the Rules of Procedure, a Credentials Committee. This committee met twice, 4 and 8 June, and it established its report, and it adopted it unanimously. I have the honor, sir, of bringing before the conference this report, which bears the symbol A/Conference 70/12, dated 8 June. We shall briefly review the contents of this report. The mandate of the committee was to verify, in accordance with Rule 4 of the procedures, whether or not the credentials of the representatives to the conference were in good and due form, and then to make a report to you on this subject. Therefore, sir, we have noted that the majority of the representatives had submitted credentials which were in good and due form as called for in Rule 3 of the Rules of Procedure, namely credentials signed by the head of state, by the head of government, or by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And so there is a small number of states which have not yet produced documents in this form, while at the same time they promised that they would do so. And so the committee decided that in view of the shortness of the conference and in light of Article 5 of the Rules of Procedure, these states would be admitted to participate on a provisional basis in the work of the conference until the credentials were received in good and due form. Furthermore, in order to assure the administrative side that this would not cause any problems, it was decided that 1 week after the conference, a reminder would be sent to the governments which had not yet submitted their credentials in conformity with Article 3. Furthermore, I draw your attention to the fact that the report contains comments made by certain representatives to the Credentials Committee. These views, therefore, are connected with the report. In view of the mandate given to the Credentials Committee, I therefore submit this report for approval by the conference. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the chairman of the Credentials Committee. As the chairman has said, we have before us the report of the Credentials Committee for approval. May I take it that the conference approves the report of the Credentials Committee? It is so decided. I now call on the representative of the United Arab Emirates, who has asked to speak.
أشكركم سيد.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would like to thank you also on behalf of the Arab group for giving me this opportunity to speak on its behalf in this conference. Ever since the end of the British mandate on Palestine in 1948, the Palestinian issue has been under discussion by the United Nations and other international organizations. Without entering into a detailed discussion of the roots of the historical developments that accompanied the tragedy whereby the Palestinian people were denied their country, I would like to mention that the partitioning of Palestine without giving the Palestinian people their right to self-determination led to the establishment of a racial and racist system based on terrorism. This entity practiced a large number of arbitrary measures through the expulsion of the Palestinians from their homes, and the rest were used as hostages and citizens from the second class without enjoying their basic rights. Mr. President, this racist entity that was established counter to the wish of the Palestinian people and the majority of peoples of the world that have not attained their independence then continued its aggression and arbitration through the occupation of Palestine, in addition to the territories of Arab countries participating in this conference. It established a large number of settlements in the occupied territories, denying the many resolutions that were adopted by the United Nations and international organizations, and denied the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination. For this reason, I would like to announce on behalf of the Arab countries, namely Algeria, Bahrain, Democratic Yemen, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Libya, Mauritania, Morocco, Oman, Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, the United Arab Emirates, Tunisia, Yemen, that we reject the credentials of the Zionist entity to the United Nations Conference on Human Settlements because it is a racial regime that is not qualified legally and ethically to participate in the work of this important conference, as this is a conference of construction rather than destruction, and housing rather than demolition, and humanity rather than barbarism. Some people might wonder why we insist on this, is this a defiance on our part? No, it's a question of asking for our rights, and we should always call for our rights in all tenacity. And I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the distinguished representative of the Arab group, and I'll call on the distinguished representative of Israel.
The report that was brought by the chairman is accepted. But after I heard what was said by one of the representatives of 20 Arab states against the one and only state that the Jewish people has, I would like to say very briefly 2 remarks. First of all, we were a nation and we were a state before most of these states came into existing. Second, I challenge every one of those states in whose names he spoke concerning the character of real democracy and democratic institutions there, and this challenge stands.
I thank the distinguished representative of Israel. The statements made by delegations will be duly reflected in the report of the conference, and this concludes our consideration of agenda item number 7. We now turn to the draft resolution in document A/Comp 70/L2 concerning the United Nations Water Conference. And I would like to call on the distinguished representative of Argentina.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, sir. Distinguished delegates, water is a scarce resource. Its proper management, use, and development is critical for mankind, in particular for the developing countries. That was indeed the understanding of the international community. That has been the understanding of the international community, and for that reason, a United Nations conference has been convened to consider that resource from all points of view. It must identify needs. It must deal with the forms of technology which can be used to solve the problems of mankind, and it must adopt national and international policies. Argentina is particularly interested in this question, and for that reason it has offered itself as the host country. And in Resolution 3513 of the RAS General Assembly session, it will be held in Mar del Plata, 400 kilometers from Buenos Aires, in March of 1977. 2 days ago, this plenary, following a suggestion by Committee Number 3, adopted a few recommendations for national action relating to this resource. It was agreed, and I quote, in the least developed countries, practically 2/3 of the population does not have access to proper supplies of drinking water. Elsewhere, priority was accorded to drinking water, and qualitative and quantitative standards were set for all people by a certain date. It was also agreed that consideration should be given by all nations to those goals at the Mar del Plata conference. For that reason, Mr. President, we think that it is entirely proper and fitting for us to sponsor document A-Conf 70 L2. It is an honor for my country to introduce this resolution on behalf of Algeria, Australia, Austria, Bangladesh, Canada, Egypt, the United States of America, the Philippines, Haiti, Mexico, Norway, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, the Libyan Arab Republic, the Dominican Republic, Romania, Sudan, Sweden, Uruguay, Venezuela, and Yugoslavia. Mr. President, before referring to the preambular and operative part of the resolution, I would like to introduce 3 minor amendments in the text, which, of course, in no wise affect the substance. The first refers to preambular paragraph 4. Its sole purpose is to bring the text into line with the national recommendation adopted by the plenary on the basis of a suggestion from Committee Number 3. The amendment is, and I will read it in English, to incorporate in line 2, after establishment, the word
by all nations.
by all nations.
By all nations. Y continúa el texto.
And then the text would continue of measurable qualitative and quantitative targets. The interpretation could be that the conference at an international level would set these if we did not make the amendment. The other amendments are even simpler. We've discussed matters with the legal department of the conference, and they suggest that we change in operative paragraphs 3 and 4 the reference to the General Assembly and make it a reference to the Economic and Social Council. Obviously, since the Assembly will be held in March, since the conference will be held in March of next year, a reference to the Assembly, which maybe state its views on the matter in December, would make this irrelevant. Whereas, in the case of the Economic and Social Council, as we know, it will have its summer session within about a month. After having announced these amendments, Mr. President, I'd like very briefly to refer to the text. The preambular paragraphs are self-explanatory. They're an introduction, as it were. The resolutions of the Council referred to are all those that have adopted since 1973 and that mark landmarks toward this conference. The resolution of the Assembly at the last session convening the conference, and there's also a reference to the recommendations for national action. Those references are very brief. In the interests of establishing the truth, in the interests of accuracy, let me say that as far as the quantitative targets are concerned, the World Health Organization and the Assembly, the World Health Organization at its 29th session, held in May last in Geneva, endorsed the establishment of targets for safe water serving all populations. That is a minimal limit, that as part of the second development decade. In connection with the operative paragraphs, Mr. President, we don't believe that there's any need for us to provide any special clarification. This is merely a means to have the conference draw the attention of the international community once again to the United Nations Water Conference. It does call on the Secretary General of the United Nations and specialized agencies to continue to give their support to the preparatory work for the conference. That includes regional meetings. And finally, it is requested that the relevant documents of this conference be transmitted to the conference, to the water conference. Also, we'd like to say here that the government of Argentina is indeed delighted that it will host the conference. The Minister of Sudan, Mr. Beging, just spoke about the matter and spoke about his post as Secretary General. His qualities ensure that all the international community and guarantee that the government of Argentina will enjoy success in hosting the conference to be held in Mar del Plata. Mr. President, in conclusion, may we appeal to delegates here that this be adopted unanimously by acclamation, and we'd be indeed very pleased if this could be adopted at this time by consensus. Thank you.
Thank the distinguished representative of Argentina. Note his suggestion and call upon the distinguished representative of the United States of America.
Mr. President, the United States delegation wants to strongly support this resolution and to congratulate Argentina's willingness to host this important...
I'm sorry to interrupt the distinguished representative from the United States, but there is a point of order raised by the distinguished representative of Japan. The distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm terribly sorry to interruption. And I had the only thing I would like to propose is simply because I had awful difficulty of hearing when the distinguished delegate of Argentina explained his second minor amendment. So may I suggest, sir, after the contribution by the distinguished delegate of the United States, either the distinguished secretary or the distinguished delegate of Argentina can read out the second minor amendment, I'd be very much grateful. And if this concerns with me only, then I will apologize to the whole conference, sir. Thank you very much. That is all.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan and now call on the distinguished representative of the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. President. We want to strongly support this resolution and to congratulate Argentina's willingness to host this important conference. We'd like to call your attention to the recommendation of the Vancouver Symposium and to the Forum that we give special attention to providing potable water for everyone. And we think that's a tremendously important objective. And we'd like to suggest to the Secretariat in preparing for this conference in Argentina that they consider establishing a small international task force which would define specifically the needs for potable water, plans for getting there, what resources be required, and be ready 9 months from now when we meet in Argentina with the specific proposal so we can move ahead more expeditiously. And finally, Mr. President, we hope that everyone here and the leadership of the United Nations will do everything possible to see that when we meet in Argentina to further the quality of life of man everywhere by working toward providing him with clean water, we will not dilute that effort with the extraneous matters now plaguing world conferences. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate from the United States of America, and I believe the Secretary would wish to clarify that change by, and read it to you now.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the request of the distinguished delegate of Japan, I'll give you the amendments or minor changes brought by the distinguished delegate of Argentina to the draft resolution contained in document A/Conf 70/L2. The first change is in the fourth preambular paragraph on the second line. It's after the word, consider the establishment that we will include by all nations. And the preamble paragraph will read, taking note of its recommendation for national action that the forthcoming United Nations Water Conference should consider the establishment by all nations of measurable qualitative and quantitative targets for the supply of safe water serving all the populations by a certain date. This is the first change, sir. The second change is to the operative third paragraph. At present, the third paragraph reads, recommend to the General Assembly. The distinguished delegate of Argentina is changing the General Assembly to ECOSOC. So the third operative paragraph will read, recommend to the Economic and Social Council that it requests the Secretary General. The same change applies to operative paragraph 4. The General Assembly will be changed to Economic and Social Council, and the operative paragraph 4 will read, recommends further to the Economic and Social Council that the relevant documents and so on and so forth. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Kedar. I now call on the distinguished representative of Afghanistan.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. During this conference and through the films we have seen, we note that the lack of water exists in many regions of the world, and it is a fundamental problem for human settlements. The water which is indispensable for natural and normal life, and therefore we need water for irrigation and drinking water. Mr. President, it's important for this conference to make arrangements so that everyone can have the quantity of water necessary to him. To have water for everyone is already the great success of human settlements. My delegation keenly supports this resolution on the water conference. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Afghanistan and call on the representative of Brazil.
Mr. President, my delegation is pleased to join the consensus on the resolution on the United Nations Water Conference. And in this connection, would like to thank the delegation of Argentina for its flexibility and cooperation. As regards the targets mentioned, the text now reflects the spirit and intention of recommendation C12, which shall naturally take into account the demographic growth in the region up to 1990. I thank you, sir.
Thank the representative of Brazil and call on the representative of Canada.
Well, Mr. President, like other distinguished delegates, I want to congratulate the distinguished delegate from Argentina in putting forward this motion and to indicate my delegation's strong support not only of the motion before us, but of the work of this conference towards the establishment of international targets for the supply of potable water, not only to our own people, but to all of the people of the world. The work of resulting in Committee 3 has led to the establishment of recommendations that potable water for all peoples of the world be provided by 1990 at the latest. That objective we join and support. This conference has, I think, focused I would hope, the world's attention and the attention of delegates on the need to provide potable water for all people as an absolute first priority. We have, as a delegation and as a country, been examining our aid programs in support of potable water projects around the world, and find that we are now, as a country, through our aid program, through the Canadian International Development Agency, spending on average $70 million per year. This figure, however, Mr. Chairman, does not reflect so much Canada's priorities as it reflects the priorities of third world countries who initiated those projects. And I want to indicate, Mr. Chairman, that Canada wishes to lend every assistance, even in excess of what already has been committed, to help carry out other safe water projects, and that we are ready to entertain additional requests for safe water projects. Such Canadian assistance, of course, has to be in support of greater national effort and a greater allocation of local resources to potable water projects as part of national plans of action in human settlements development, and of course must meet the priorities and fit with the priorities of the countries seeking assistance. But this conference has concerned itself primarily with considering the targets, the principles, and the policies that should guide the development of national and international programs in human settlements development. We feel that the international communities should indicate tangible evidence for support of this crucial worldwide program in dollar terms to show to the world that there is a commitment behind all of the proposals and the resolutions here presented. And I would therefore encourage countries and delegations in the 9 months before the water conference to consider their commitment to the improvement of human settlements in the less developed countries, and by hopefully stating and working out in those 9 months what financial resources they think are available and what financial resources are required to achieve the targets that we have set at this conference. And in the 9 months that we have before this conference, we have an opportunity, I think, of refining each of our targets, both nationally and internationally, and refining our commitments to them in order to assure that we achieve the policies and the principles and the targets that were set here at Habitat.
I thank the distinguished representative of Canada and call on the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
I have some difficulty. Je vous remercie, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. I simply want to say this, and I will be brief. The Tunisian delegation is very happy to see this resolution on the water conference, and would like to thank the co-sponsors, and especially the Argentine government, which was kind enough to agree to invite people to Argentina in 1977. I take this opportunity to support this resolution and to ask that the name of Tunisia be figured as a co-sponsor of this resolution. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia and call on the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation, too, wishes to associate itself very warmly with this proposal and to support the proposal and that it be approved by consensus, given the importance of this subject. I would like to take this opportunity, sir, to thank the Argentine government and the Secretariat, which is in the process of preparing for this conference. On the other hand, sir, I would like to have the feelings of this assembly associated with this conference on desertification, which is also in preparation. I think that this conference on desertification has a very direct impact on the developing countries. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Portugal. May I take it then that it's the wish of the conference to adopt the draft resolution in document ACOMP 70L2 unanimously? It is so decided. This concludes our consideration of the third item on our agenda this morning. We now turn to the adoption of Part 3, Chapter 3 of the report of the conference, and I now invite the Rapporteur General of the conference, Mr. Adolf Czeborowski of Poland, to introduce the draft of Chapter 3, Part 3, which is a summary of general debate, document ACONF 70L1, Addendum 1 of the conference report. Mr. Czeborowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President and distinguished delegates, in introducing the Chapter 3, Part 3 of the conference draft report, which covers the plenary debate, I should also like to point out that it will not be possible to present to the conference the complete summaries of the proceedings in plenary on the committee reports, nor upon the closing ceremonies. The report, which will cover the 15 and the 16 plenary sessions, will be still presented to all of you today in the afternoon as Addendum 2 to the document. The others parts will be incorporated in the final report together with the decisions of the conference and the annexes setting out the documents submitted to the conference. Mr. President, I am sure that the conference will appreciate the reasons for this and will follow the practice in previous conferences in entrusting the Rapporteur General and the Secretariat with preparing the final report, with introducing all the necessary language corrections and some minor amendments, and then to present the report to the ECOSOC and to the General Assembly. Introducing the part of the report which is presented now to the deliberation of the plenary, I do not intend, Mr. President, to report orally on everything what is written and in front of the distinguished delegates, but I nevertheless like to use this opportunity to express my sincere thanks, first to the friends of the rapporteur, and then to the number of delegations and delegates who were kind enough to help and to support the Rapporteur General in his work through the whole period of our conference. Their assistance and their remarks helped substantially in the preparation of the draft which is now in front of you. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Rapporteur General of the conference for his report. May I remind delegations wishing to submit non-substantive textual amendments or corrections in translation that they should give them to the Rapporteur General in writing. I suggest to the conference that it consider this document in sections rather than paragraphs, or by paragraph, and I propose that we divide the document into sections as follows. The first, paragraphs 1 to 3. The second, paragraphs 4 to 17. Third, paragraphs 18 to 24. Next, paragraphs 25 to 32. And fifthly and finally, paragraphs 35 and 36. That's it? did I say 33, 32, 36? If there is no comment on that, we may proceed with paragraphs 1 to 3. If there is no comment on paragraphs 1 to 3, they can be considered adopted. Next, paragraphs 4 to 17. Yes, Mr. Rapporteur General.
One, I have to minor amendment of my own. Namely, in paragraph 16, there was a mistake in typing, and in the fourth line from the bottom, instead of planning production, these are the two last words in the fourth line from the bottom, it is the primary production. At the same time, Mr. President, I would like to inform that I have to some of the paragraphs in this group some suggestions, mostly of linguistic character. They were presented to me by some delegates, which I will take into account when working on the final form of the report. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Rapporteur General, and I presume he will submit that change which he has just made in writing. The next, then, is there any comment on further comment on paragraphs 4 to 17? I take it then that that is the wish of the conference to adopt that. Paragraphs 18 to 24. The Rapporteur General.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to suggest the change of one of the paragraphs in that group. My proposal follows the consultations which I had in the very last days with the interested countries. My proposal relates to paragraph 24, and I propose to substitute the present text by the new one, which I will read with your permission, Mr. President. The new text of paragraph 24 reads: the head of the Cyprus delegation stressed the settlement problems that arose from the Turkish invasion and occupation of part of Cyprus and the expulsion of 1/3 of the population from their homes and the consequential great human suffering. The Turkish delegate, referring to the sufferings of Turkish Cypriots for the past 12 years and what he described as the unconstitutional acts by Greek Cypriots, said that he rejected this unfounded allegation and that the Cyprus problem can only be settled through intercommunal talks. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chabrowski. Are there any comments on paragraphs 18 to 24? Then we assume those are approved by the conference and move to paragraphs 25 to 32. Are there any comments on paragraphs 25 to 32? If not, we can move then. Oh, I recognize the distinguished representative of the Palatine Liberation Organization.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry that you have not seen my hand before, I wish to make reference to paragraphs 21 and 22. I don't feel that paragraph 21 and 22 reflect adequately the views expressed by our delegation and delegations of the Arab countries. We have linked very closely the situation of our people and their dispossession with those of South Africa, Namibia, and Rhodesia. And we don't feel that this has been covered or expressed adequately in this regard.
I will ask the Rapporteur General, Mr. Chabrowski, to respond, please.
I would like to ask the distinguished representative of PLO to propose to me the exact text of the amendment he wishes to have. Now, immediately, if it is possible, of course. No,
I will pass it to you later on. Shortly, I do not have it prepared. I just glanced the document now. I have not had a chance to read it completely before. So I will pass it on to you.
A point of order. The distinguished representative of Israel.
I would like to ask the Chair if it is possible, according to accepted procedure, to bring to the forum, to the plenary session, something that never was seen before and perhaps never heard before.
I would like to call on the Rapporteur General to respond, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, first, if there are any amendments at all, they must be presented to me now immediately, and I must present those amendments to the plenary. I can't accept at present any other amendments. They will be given to us on the later time or later date. Secondly, I can't also accept from any party any amendment they will